Nirasya sarva sandeham akikritya sudarshanam prakashita rahasyam tam bhajami gurumishwaram itam shri radhika prana nata pada sarojayo yena premanubhutyasha dattam tam shri gurum bhaje Shri Govinda Pararavinda Marupananya Vilashojitan Purna Prema Rasotsavo Jalamano Vritti Prasannananan Shajvad Krishna Katha Mahamrita Payora Shomura Kedato Bande Bhagavatani Mananulavam Murtnani Patyakshito Namah Shri Guru Krishnaya Nirupari Kripa Krite Ya Shri Chaitanya Rupa Bhut Tanvan Prema Rasam Kalo Jayatam Surato Pangor Mama Mandamate Guti Matsarvasva Parambojo Radha Madana Mohano Adadana-strinam dantaye yacheham puna puna Srimad Rupa Parambojo Dhulisyam janma janmani Abhirapali patiputra kanta Dasya bilashati balashvavara Sri Rupa chintamala sapti sangsto Matsvanta durdanta churastam Raganugami bhajano lasamanasanam Shri Radhaya sahasara smaratam brajendhum Shri Rupa parakamala shrita chetasame Chittam satam nirupari madhukari Yatu pada padme Bhakterya nikilarta varga jananiya brahma sakshat krite Anandatishaya prada vishaya jat sukyat vimuktir yaya Shri Radha Ramanam param bhaja yugam yasya mahanashrayo Ya karya vrajalokavad gurutara premnaiva tasyai namah Ya ramya nikilagha sanga shamani shrutratritim sangata Ya svadya rasikai sukabdi janani dhikarya mukti spriham Yadhyata hridaye vrajendra tanuja premamrita syandini Saji yadhari bhakta vrinda mahita Dhanyeha Padyavali. By the grace of Shri Kali Yuga Pavana the Svabhajana Vibhajana Prayojana Avatar Prema Purushottam Karuna Mahasagar Shri Gauranga Mahaprabhu and his beloved Parshad, the crest jewel of Gaudiya Vaishnavacharyas, the fulfiller of his heart's desire, Sri Rupa Gosvami Prabhupada. Again, today we continue our discussion of Padyavali. And in our last reading, we completed the discussion we've offered regarding the deity of Sri Bhagavan and how it is to be viewed not merely as a stone but as a manifest form of Bhagavan himself. And this is in regard to this verse cited by Sri Rupa Prabhupada about the essential nature of Bhagavad-dharma, where various unfavorable attitudes are censured for the purpose of highlighting the attitudes that are most conducive to the practice of Bhagavad-dharma, or that are integral to it. So today we'll come to the second subject matter mentioned in the verse under discussion, which is the phrase guruṣu naramati, or the idea of a man or a human being in relation to gurus. So as there was a proper or improper way of conceiving or perceiving the deity, so too there is in regard to the guru. So we'll now look at a number of statements in the Bhagavatam and a number of comments made in regard to these statements by Sri Samipad, Sri Sanatana Pad, Sri Jiva Pad, Sri Chakravarti Pad, and others in regard to these subjects, so that we can understand how one is meant to see the Guru and how Bhagavan's presence or role as the Guru is meant to be understood. So I'll start from the top of the fresh file. This understanding of the intended sense of the description of being, quote, situated in Naraka, in the verse under discussion, is similarly applicable to those who foster the various other inapt attitudes related to Bhagavad-dharma mentioned in the verse. The next of which is, quote, the idea of a man in relation to gurus, guruṣu naramatihi. So now we'll just unpack this phrase. The usage of the plural in this phrase can be understood as simply a grammatical gesture of respect, and thus imply that one should not foster the idea that one's diksha guru, that is, the guru who granted one diksha into the Gopal mantra or another principal mantra used for upasana of Sri Bhagavan on the path of bhakti, is merely a human being. So it's a common gesture in Sanskrit literature to describe a singular subject using a plural case ending as a way of showing reverence for that object. And there are some instances of that also in Indo-European languages, especially in earlier centuries. So one way of interpreting the statement is simply that the mention of the plurality of gurus means just, quote, the guru or the teacher in general, and is spoken of in the plural to show respect for the guru. Alternately, the word guruṣu can be understood to literally refer to a plurality of gurus. That is, one's diksha guru along with all the shiksha gurus one may have had on the path of bhakti. Alternately again, it can be understood to refer to the three primary gurus a twice-born has in life, namely one's parents, the guru who grants one the upanayan samskara, and the guru who grants one knowledge of Bhagavan and the path of bhakti, as will be explained ahead. So this third interpretation is based on some statements of Bhagavan Sri Krishna himself in the 10th canto, which we'll get to in a little while. So that's why there's a mention of it being explained ahead. So the overall point is that one should see all the gurus as a manifestation of Bhagavan. There's statements in the Upanishads where it says, Matri devo bhava, pitri devo bhava, acharya devo bhava, atiti devo bhava, that the guest should be seen to be God, the guru should be seen to be God, the mother should be seen to be God, the father should be seen to be God. So, whether you interpret it by any of these means, one should see that all of these elders, all of these sources of knowledge and wisdom in our life should be understood to have a divine backing, or to be actually manifestations of the divine in our life. So as we go through this discussion, we will see some subtleties in this respect. In general, in this regard, Sri Sanatana Pad concludes his masterwork Brihad-bhagavatamrita with an obeisance unto Bhagavan Sri Krishna that expresses adoration for Sri Krishna specifically because of his profound graciousness in manifesting himself as the Guru who teaches bhakti to himself. So this is the very last verse in the whole Brihad-bhagavatamrita. So as we know from hermeneutics, that are discussed in the Sandarbhas, the point that's made at the very beginning and the very end of a text are especially to be considered to be of special importance, or to be areas where the author is making points that are most important. So the fact that Sanatana Gosvami ends the whole text on this topic shows also the centrality of recognition of the role of Bhagavan in one's life as the source of the teachings one receives is very central to cultivating devotion for Bhagavan, or following the path of bhakti to him. So he ends the text in this way. Tasmai namostu nirupadi kripa kulaya Shri Rajatanayaya Guru-tamaya Yakaraya nijajanam swayameva bhaktim tasyati tushyati yatha paramopakartu. May my obeisance be offered unto him, the blessed son of the cowherd's king, the most exalted of gurus, who, being overcome with unconditional compassion, entirely of his own accord, causes persons who are his own to engage in bhakti to himself, and becomes greatly satisfied with them, just as one does with a paramount benefactor. So Sanatana Pada elaborates on this verse in his commentaries, so we'll look at that to glean what he wishes to convey. So he comments in this regard, the most exalted of gurus, means he who is the best among gurus, that is, teachers, because of his bestowing all knowledge and so forth in an internal form as Paramatma and an external form as an Acharya, as is stated by Uddhava in the 11th canto. Quote, O Isha, abounding with joy, remembering the accomplishment of you, who with your form situated in the mind, and form as the Acharya, internally and externally dispel inauspiciousness, and manifest your own state for the embodied. The wise do not attain acquittance of their debt to you, even within the lifespan of Brahma. So this is a wonderful statement, also cited in the opening chapter of the Charitamrita, and something that we will revisit later in this discussion. So I won't elaborate on this verse of Uddhava here, but many very significant points are drawn from this statement. But here, specifically, Sanatana Gosvami is saying that why is Krishna himself to be considered the ultimate guru? Because the person who conveys knowledge in the world is regarded as a form or a function being performed of Krishna himself, and then the presence of Bhagavan that's enabling the psyche to function such that one can receive that knowledge, that's also considered a form of Bhagavan. So both the administration of the knowledge as well as the cognitive capacity to grasp that knowledge, both are being made possible by Bhagavan. And with that, what is he doing? He's revealing, quote, his own state. In other words, his own nature, his own self. He's revealing himself to people, giving them both understanding of that and the capacity to grasp that understanding. So he who in this way is giving that which is most precious and wonderful, what could someone do to reciprocate sufficiently? They couldn't. If the greatest of all things is what has been given, can you ever reciprocate equally for being given the greatest of all things? You couldn't, because if you could, you would be giving something that would also be as great as the gift is given, and then the gift that was given wouldn't be the greatest of all things. So, essentially, you are incapable of ever sufficiently reciprocating for such a wonderful gift. But nevertheless, that's not that sort of eternal debt that one feels isn't a cause of sorrow or suffering, but rather abounding with joy, remembering this accomplishment or this greatness of Bhagavan. In other words, rejoicing at the infinite graciousness of Bhagavan. Bhaktas, make this expression or regard themselves as forever indebted, which is another way of saying feel forever fresh inspiration to offer themselves with bhakti to him. So, the author also shows Bhagavan Sri Krishna as being the most exalted of gurus, who is overcome with unconditional compassion in the second half of the verse. Krishna, who is the blessed son of the cowherd's king, causes persons who are his own, that is, his own servants or bhaktas, or jivas in general, to engage in bhakti in the form of hearing about himself, praising himself, and so on. That is, he causes them to perform bhakti by impelling all of their senses to do so. So, none of the functions of the psyche, none of the laws of nature, none of the functioning that animates this world is possible without, he who is the source of the potency thereof, or the potency that makes those things happen. So he's enabling these activities to be performed. He's also teaching how these activities are performed. He's also providing the content about which these activities are centered. So if we ever hear about Bhagavan, it's because he's graced us to hear about him. If we ever have the chance to praise Bhagavan, it's because we've been blessed by him with knowledge of his praiseworthiness and the tongue and the inspiration and the time and the energy and the health and everything else required to make an act of praise of him. So he is essentially, quote, causing these things to happen. He's enabling all of our senses to function, to engage in these acts of bhakti. And what's motivating him to do this? Then it's saying, quote, entirely of his own accord, and, quote, overcome with unconditional compassion. So it's not that he is doing this as a means of exploitation or out of necessity to acquire some type of gain, but rather only for the goodwill of us, and only of his own wish and inclination. And not because then you might say, well, maybe we deserve it or we ought to be given it. And so he's just giving this as an act of duty. So to dispel that idea, he's saying, quote, entirely of his own accord. That is, entirely without consideration of their eligibility, adhikar, capability, shakti, and so on. Means the jiva doesn't have any inherent capability to perform these activities entirely. Obviously, they have kartritva in a potential form that by the support of these other energies that are conceived in a stock form, if you will, of Bhagavans, then some degree of agency is conceived to exist in the jiva. But and the jiva being a dependent part upon Bhagavan and thus a servant of Bhagavan in one sense has a certain degree of eligibility or adhikar to engage in such activity, yet doesn't have necessarily eligibility, in terms of having faith or having favorable samskar for doing so. So the implication here is that Bhagavan is compassionately conveying this capability and inspiration and to people to do this, whether or not they have much eligibility for bhakti or not, or whether they have great capacity or not. He's wishing this of his own accord. And moreover, even in giving this thing to people who, so to speak, don't deserve it or haven't merited receiving it, and who don't have any inherent capacity to even engage with it unless they're taught and enabled to do so, even after giving this thing to them and enabling them to culture it and teaching them how to culture it and then finally causing them to ultimately express it, then what happens? Then, quote, he becomes greatly satisfied with them, those performers of bhakti. And then he's very happy. A little bit like a parent might teach a child, a skill or a task or a quality, and then when the child acquires that and expresses it back, then the parent is very happy to see that. So an illustration is given in regard to the great satisfaction Sri Krishna feels. Just as someone becomes greatly satisfied with a person who is a paramount benefactor. Now this is interesting, because here Bhagavan is largely in the position of the superior, or in the position of the greater entity who's giving capacity, knowledge, etc. to a lesser entity. But yet he's feeling satisfaction as though he's received something as if from a benefactor, as if from someone greater than himself, or in a position or in a role of possessing something of magnitude that he doesn't have. So even though he's, so to speak, in the role of the benefactor himself, he feels as though he's receiving on the receiving end of great benefaction from a benefactor. Alternately, it can be interpreted that a question is raised. Why does he become greatly satisfied with they who worship him in that way? That is, they who worship him at his own prompting and enabling of them to do so. In response, it is said, since that person, that is one whom he has prompted and enabled to worship himself, has brought about paramount benefit specifically for him, Krishna, by means of their performance of bhakti. So what this means is that Krishna genuinely feels benefited. He genuinely feels enriched and enlivened and joyful to receive bhakti from the people who he gave bhakti, or from the people that he trained and enabled and so forth to have bhakti, when with all of that, they, by his facilitation, then express that, he feels as though he's been greatly and highly benefited, just as a parent might love their child and then ultimately feel that they learn from the child, or that they are supremely benefited by what the child expresses with the gifts that they've received from the parent. So this is a testament to Bhagavan, although being of Aptakam and Atmaram and all of this, that he's fulfilled in and of himself and self-satisfied in and of himself. Nevertheless, exchanges of love, or exchanges of this, mutual attunement and expression of care and adoration for one another, or simply put, bhakti, is enriching to him, or it's an expanding, or it's an expression of his blissfulness and his inner joy and so forth. So this, ending the whole Brihad Bhagavatamrita on this note, where the whole text is showing who has received the greatest grace of Bhagavan and who most deeply satisfies Bhagavan the most, and then finally to end it on this note of how Bhagavan himself feels so deeply satisfied to receive this type of bhakti in all of these forms, and obviously in the greatest form from the people of Braja. So the opening statement of the text praises Krishna for appearing, jāti nija prema dānavatirno, that he has appeared to bestow prema for himself upon others, and that he himself experiences the way the verse is speaking, I didn't recite the whole verse, that by virtue of him appearing as Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he is experiencing the ultimate depth of his love for the gopis. So the text opens up with how much he loves his bhakta, how profoundly he relishes and adores the love that he receives from his bhaktas, namely principally the gopis. And then here ends on the note of, by appearing as the guru, by teaching others, ultimately this form, the implication is this form of bhakti that he ultimately most deeply reciprocates with, or most deeply experiences in the form of the gopis bhava, that by teaching that and ultimately receiving that from the jivas whom he teaches that, he feels supremely benefited or supremely enriched, or this is the self-fulfilling, ever-increasing nature of the infinite divine play. So anyway, that's slightly off topic, but a nice point to be reminded of in terms of Sanatana Goswami's overall presentation in his text. And indeed in that text, this verse that he cited just now is discussed in various other places, and we'll get on to that further on in our discussion. So coming back to our context here, the point we're trying to bring up is this idea that the guru should not be seen as merely a human being, rather the guru should be seen as a manifestation of Bhagavan. So here, this verse is describing that Bhagavan, out of great compassion of his own accord, takes up this role or performs this function. And when he does so and then teaches bhakti to jivas and then receives that bhakti back from them, he feels highly satisfied. So this, it's not a painstaking task or like a school teacher who goes off and teaches and then gets off work and then goes to do what they find more pleasurable, but this task of teaching and then, receiving back the expression of what he's taught is deeply satisfying to Bhagavan. So now we'll go into much more detail about how this takes place. So Sri Kaviraj Goswami Pad also takes up this important subject in the very first chapter of his Chaitanya Charitamrita. He first states the overall point to be understood. Guru Krishna Rupahan Shastrera Pramane Guru Rupe Krishna Kripa Karena Bhakta Gane. The Guru is a form of Krishna, as per the evidence of Shastra. In the form of the Guru, Krishna bestows grace upon bhaktas. To evidence this principle in general, he cites the following statement of Bhagavan Sri Krishna himself. Acharyam mam bijaniyan navamanyeta karhi chit namartya buddhyasuyeta sarvadeva mayo guru. Know the Acharya to be me. One should never disrespect him, and one should not, out of consideration of him being immortal, engage in detraction of him. The Guru is an embodiment of all the Devas. Sri Jiva also cites this verse spoken by Bhagavan Sri Krishna in his discussion of the role of the Guru on the path of bhakti in Bhakti Sandarbha, and explains that this verse is actually spoken as part of a delineation of the duties of a brahmachari following the path of karma. So he says, vision of Bhagavan is to be fostered even by the followers of the path of karma in relation to their own guru. Thus he says, Acharyam mam, means thus Krishna teaches this verse. He then draws a conclusion from this using a fortiori reasoning. In this case, consequently indeed, vision of Bhagavan is to be fostered in regard to such a guru by seekers of the supreme object, that is, adherents of the paths of jnana and bhakti. So, in the Bhakti Sandarbha, he's obviously trying to teach how the guru is to be seen on the path of bhakti. But this statement of Krishna in the Bhagavatam is actually spoken in the context of how to follow the path of karma. So one might say, does this verse apply, or how does it apply to people following a different path or path of bhakti? So to show or to derive a teaching specific to the path of bhakti, from this teaching given regarding the path of karma, he uses this hermeneutic of kaimutya nyaya by saying, if even people following the karma marg are taught to see the guru as a manifestation of Bhagavan, or as, a function of the divine in their life that's bringing this supreme benefit in the form of knowledge to them, if that's taught even for people on the path of karma, then it's all the more true for people on the path of bhakti, or people on the path of gyan, or people who aren't just receiving knowledge that relates to their role and function in the worldly context, but who are seeking experience of the paramartha, namely Bhagavan or Brahman, or whichever aspect of the paratattva someone is seeking to realize. So, in short, this point that Kaviraj Goswami is making, he's citing then these statements from the Bhagavatam to support that idea. So then Jiva Goswami's comments are showing why Kaviraj Goswami made this citation. To evidence this conclusion, he cites two verses which were taught by Sri Narada to Sri Yudhisthira elsewhere in Srimad Bhagavatam, wherein there is direct condemnation of, quote, the idea of a man in relation to gurus, as was mentioned in the verse under discussion. So Jiva Goswami gives the basis for applying this kaimutya nyaya hermeneutic interpretation of this teaching regarding the karma marg by citing these two verses from the 7th canto. So he says, which say, Yasya shakshat bhagavati jnana deepa prade guru martya sadhi shrutam tasya sarvam kunjara shochavat Esha vai bhagavan sakshat pradhana purusheshvaraha yogeshwarer vimigyanggrir loko yam manyate naram. All the hearing of one who has the misconception of a mortal in relation to the Guru, who is the giver of the lamp of knowledge and Bhagavan in person, is like the bathing of an elephant. He whom a worldly person considers to be merely a human being is verily Bhagavan in person, the Ishvara of Pradhan and the Purusha, that is, of Maya and the Jivas, he whose feet are sought by the masters of yoga. So he's saying that if someone receives knowledge from a guru, but thinks that this doesn't have the understanding that that to receive knowledge is to receive a divine blessing, or to receive actually the favor of Bhagavan, then what will one do with that knowledge if one doesn't value it, if one doesn't see that it has ultimate meaning and significance, and that there isn't an ultimate imperative to apply that knowledge in one's life? Then what good will hearing that knowledge be? It won't result in any genuine benefit, because one won't actually apply the knowledge. And knowledge isn't just said for no reason, it's said because it has tangible application. So therefore, the hearing of knowledge when one doesn't have that due regard is compared to the bathing of an elephant, which is a classical way of saying that something is futile. So an elephant is known to go to the river and bathe, and then immediately after getting out of the river, roll in the dust or the mud on the bank of the river and cake one's body with dirt to protect itself from insects and other things. So the elephant, although it bathes, it doesn't quote-unquote stay clean for very long. In other words, as soon as it's bathed, it's dirty again right afterwards. So thus, in classical Sanskrit literature, the idea of an elephant bathing is synonymous with something being extremely short-lived and thus futile. So, to receive knowledge with no respect for that knowledge, with no understanding of the value and the necessity of applying the knowledge, leads to no tangible transformation in a person's life, leads to no tangible application of the knowledge, and thus no tangible benefit to the person. So that learning is, goes in vain, in other words. So this is the point, and then this is elaborated on in the commentaries, so we'll look at those. These statements are made by Sri Narada immediately following his teaching to Sri Yudhisthira that, quote, a person certainly can quickly conquer lust, anger, greed, pride, fear, and all other such impediments by means of bhakti to the Guru. So there's a stack of 3 or 4 verses where so many different means of overcoming various vices are described. And then after listing all of these various means, then it is said, but by Guru Bhakti, by bhakti to the Guru, one can overcome all of those impediments. So then, immediately following that statement, the verses we just read are spoken. But if you hear from the Guru without due respect for the Guru, then it'll go in vain. In other words, if one genuinely follows what the Guru teaches, one will overcome all of the impediments. But if one learns from the Guru but doesn't respect what the Guru says, then that won't work, essentially. So there's all these different impediments that people struggle with: lust, anger, greed, etc. If one hears from a teacher and has devotion to that teacher, means sincerely follows what that teacher says, then one will succeed in overcoming them. But if one hears from the teacher but doesn't really have faith and due regard for what the teacher says, then all that hearing will go in vain, because one doesn't have the devotion and the impetus to do the application of the knowledge and thereby succeed in fulfilling the purpose of receiving the knowledge, namely transforming oneself into a state of goodness. So this is the logic flowing through the series of statements. Sri Jiva in his commentary on these verses, also cites various statements from other shastras that reiterate the same teachings. The Shruti also states in Shveteshvara Upanishad, this other famous statement, these discussed subjects, meaning the teachings a guru gives to a disciple regarding Brahma Vidya. Or, as Sanatana Gosvami takes it, these katita artaha, these artas. So arta can mean subjects which were discussed or taught by the Guru, or he takes it that artas can mean the purushartas. So that's a little bit more of an extrapolated out of context interpretation, but when you want to speak more broadly about the role of Guru in leading someone towards the purushartas, it's also undoubtedly relevant and valid interpretation. So whether you take it as all the various purushartas or you take it as all the subject matters that were taught by the Guru to the disciple, these are certainly revealed to the great soul who has pure bhakti to Deva, and as to Deva, so also to the Guru. So in other words, if one has devotion to Bhagavan and devotion to the Guru, recognizing the Guru to be a manifestation of Bhagavan, then one will come to realize everything that one was taught, or one will come to succeed in all of the endeavors for which one is learning. Thus, in Brahma-vaivarta Purana, it is said, one meets or attains he who is worshipped by the wise, namely Bhagavan, through remembrance, or in other words, through practices of bhakti, as a result of bhakti to the Guru. That is, remembrance of Bhagavan whereby he is served and satisfied, develops as a result of bhakti to one's Guru. So if one has devotion to the Guru, one will duly regard the teachings that the Guru gives, one will follow the teachings the Guru gives, thus one will be able to engage appropriately in remembrance and other acts of devotion to Bhagavan, and by doing that, one will realize Bhagavan. So then the contrast is shown. Even if he is met, however, he cannot be attained, that is, he is not truly attained by jivas who are engrossed in egotism. So this is the other side of the coin. In other words, if one doesn't really regard the teacher, the guru, as bringing knowledge to oneself that is coming from a divine source, if one is thinking, I myself already know, or I myself am more important or don't need to be taught, or what have you, then if one has this type of arrogance or egotism, then as it is seen in Bhagavan's Leelas, in the case of, Duryodhana or Shishupal or persons like this, even if they meet Krishna himself, still, there's no real attainment of him, or there's no real appreciation for him. So it's not just that one needs to be in a particular space at a particular time, but rather that one has to have the requisite sensibility in order to truly experience or truly attain. In the praise of Devaduti in Padma Purana, it is also said, if the bhakti I have for my guru is greater than that is, the bhakti I have for Hari, then on the strength of that virtue, let Hari reveal himself to me. So this is a statement to show that devotion for the guru is a very high virtue. It's a virtue that is essential to the path of bhakti and is something that is deeply pleasing to Bhagavan. So this person, Devaduti, is saying that Bhagavan will be so pleased by my devotion to the guru that he'll be pleased to bless me or reveal himself to me because of that virtue that I have, or that quality I have in having shown due devotion to the guru, or in other words, to Bhagavan's appearance to me already in the form of the teacher. So if Bhagavan is coming in the form of the teacher, and then we're not showing due respect to that, but then we're saying, I want to experience a revelation of Bhagavan, then think of it from Bhagavan's perspective. You don't even duly appreciate the form that I've already come to you in, so why now how do you expect me to come to you in a more intimate or a more profound form if you haven't even learned to duly regard this initial form that I've appeared to you in? So Chakravarti Pad elaborates here. One can quickly, that is without difficulty, conquer all the aforementioned impediments by means of bhakti to the guru, meaning lust, anger, greed, etc. This is like one principal medicine which cures all diseases. This is the meaning. In this regard, conquering kama and so forth is the jnani's sought result of Guru Bhakti, whereas for pure bhaktas, it is secondary. That is a secondary result, their primary attainment being serving and satisfying Sri Bhagavan. This distinction is to be observed. So in the case of persons following the path of jnana, why do they have a guru? Why do they show regard for the guru? Why do they have bhakti to the guru? Because they're trying to overcome maya, they're trying to overcome their vices and so forth and achieve their state of realization. So once they achieve that, then there's no more need for the guru, there's no more need for these things, they've fulfilled the purpose. But in the case of bhaktas, they're not showing reverence for the guru just as a means of overcoming kama or what have you, but they're showing reverence for the guru because this is pleasing to Bhagavan and their whole goal is pleasing to Bhagavan. So the fact that by doing this activity that pleases Bhagavan, that they also become purified and freed from their vices, that's no doubt appreciated and no doubt felt to be necessary, but it's not the primary or it's not the principal or fundamental point that they're seeking to observe. Even, you could say, their desire to be free from vices is secondary to, or is only there because of their desire to engage purely in bhakti. And because you can't engage purely in bhakti in the presence of those vices, we need to get rid of the vices. So this is a nice point Chakravarti Pad draws out, and then he elaborates as follows. Furthermore, even if one has profuse bhakti to the guru, it all becomes futile if one has the notion of a human in relation to the Guru, that is, if one considers the Guru merely a human being and not a form of Sri Bhagavan in person. So, again, it's not only the behavior that matters. In other words, he's saying someone might have bhakti to the Guru, but why do they have bhakti to the Guru? This is also to be understood. In other words, it can also be entirely self-serving. Someone can have bhakti to the Guru because of the social status that it brings them, because of the desire they have to inherit the Guru's property or the Guru's following or the Guru's social stature or what have you. Someone might have all kinds of different motivations for serving a Guru. So even if one has all kinds of devotion, if that devotion is not actually motivated by due regard for Bhagavan's role as the Guru and is done basically using the Guru as just another person in the world, just thinking, oh, this is a person that I can, serve and get something from, then he's saying if that's the attitude, then it will go in vain. So it's both the attitude or the motivation as well as the activity that's practiced that matter. Thus he says, Yasya, he speaks this verse, in regard to the mention of, quote, Bhagavan in person, the purport is that even the notion of a part of Bhagavan is not to be fostered in relation to the Guru. That is, one should not regard the Guru to be Bhagavan in person just because the Guru is a part of Bhagavan. So as it was also discussed in regard to the Vigraha-tattva, to say, oh, Bhagavan is present everywhere, so Bhagavan's present in the deity, therefore we worship it. No, that's not due regard for the deity. So similarly to say, oh yes, the Guru is a form of Bhagavan. Bhagavan is present everywhere, he's also present in the Guru, therefore we respect Guru as Bhagavan. Not on that premise, or that's not the intended perspective. So by saying Sakshat Bhagavati in Chakravarti Pad's view, that's precluding that mere regard for the mere omnipresence, if you will, of Bhagavan is not what is being alluded to here. Alternately, the meaning of this verse is that the hearing, that is the mantra related to Bhagavan that is heard from the Guru, as well as the hearing, contemplation, and so forth, meaning meditation, upasana, done in accord with the Guru's teaching, of one who has the misconception of a human in relation to one's object of worship, Bhagavan himself, present in person as the Guru, i.e., one who fosters the misconception that the Guru is merely a human being and not a form of Bhagavan in person, is futile. So when it says all the hearing goes in vain, then generally speaking, that means what one learns from the Guru, but he's saying you could also take this hearing or shravana as shravana manana nididhyasana, as per the famous statement in the Brihadaranyaka, which is like a formula for all realizations of the Paratattva, that because the Atma is drastabhya, or to be perceived or experienced, it's heard about, it's contemplated, and then it's meditated upon, or then one performs upasana to realize it. So he's saying that when the quote, hearing goes in vain, means that one won't succeed in the upasana that one performs when one has this attitude of, what he calls a misconception or asaddhi, because that misconception of thinking the Guru is a human being is actually a lack of understanding of Bhagavan, because it's a lack of understanding how Bhagavan graces one, how Bhagavan comes and bestows teachings in the form of the Guru. So it's a lack of recognition of the greatness or of the nature of the object one is trying to realize. And when one lacks that understanding, then that will hamper this attempt that one has to engage in the practice. So in regard to the reference made in 7.15.26, to quote, the misconception of a mortal in relation to the Guru, Sri Jiva also cites the verse under discussion in his commentary as a comparable condemnation of this attitude. So, why am I bringing an elaborate discussion of these verses in the Bhagavatam from the 7th canto? Because Jiva Gosvami cites the verse we're talking about as a parallel statement for the very same teaching. So we can understand what's conveyed in this teaching by looking at the the more elaborated and nuanced understanding taught in these comments on these verses in the Bhagavatam. So Jiva Gosvami cites our verse that we're talking about, or this phrase, guruṣu naramati, and then elaborates how Sri Narada accounts for the presence of this attitude among worldly persons in the latter of the two aforecited verses. So, he says, it is not that the occurrence of this, that is, the misconception of the Guru being merely a human being among people, is surprising. In other words, that people would think that a person is just another person like them. You can't really be shocked or surprised that people would do this. Rather, it's a refined form of culture to not think that way. So he's saying that the prevalence of this attitude is not surprising on account of the occurrence of such thought on the part of people in general, even in regard to Bhagavan in person. Thus he says, speaks the verse. So he's interpreting this statement to mean when Bhagavan performs avatars, people also think Bhagavan is just a human being. So when Bhagavan is appearing as the Guru, that people will think the Guru is just a human being. How can you be surprised? So Jiva Goswami makes that point because he's elaborating on points made by Sridhar Swami. So we'll look at what Sridhar Swami has said on this verse. So in this regard, Sri Samipad offers two interpretations of 7.15.27. Quote, an objection is raised in regard to the implication of the previous verse that a disciple should see the Guru as Bhagavan in person. Well, the son and so on, that is, and other various relatives and acquaintances, even of the Guru, consider him only a human being. So this is a very nice, practical, realistic objection. If you say, you should see that the Guru is, Bhagavan himself. And you say, well, his wife doesn't think so. His son doesn't think so. His uncle doesn't think so. Nobody else in the village thinks so. So why should I see him as Bhagavan when everyone else is just treating him like a very common person? So that doubt or that difficulty, if you will, that a person might feel is addressed in this verse. So thus he says, he or Esha, that is the Guru, shall verily be regarded as Bhagavan in person. That is, still you should definitely think this way, even if other people who know this person very well think otherwise. So even if the Guru's son and other relatives do not see the Guru in that way, a worldly person's conception, quote, he, meaning the Guru, is a human being, is a misunderstanding. This is the meaning. So in other words, ordinary people thinking, a Guru is just no different than anyone else. In other words, to lack regard for the fact that education itself can be regarded as grace and divinity, that teachings coming from the Shastra, the person who's conveying those teachings, conveying teachings that lead to the ultimate well-being of people, that's not something that's ultimately being done by Bhagavan himself. To lack that perspective, that's a common misunderstanding among common people. So he's taking it as that's one interpretation. And now he gives a second interpretation, and as we'll see, Jiva Goswami, Vishwanath Chakravarti, they both prefer the second interpretation. So alternately, the intent of the verse can be interpreted as follows. It is not that the Guru should not be seen as Bhagavan by a disciple, even while appearing to be an ordinary human being, because of his sons and others' conception of him being a human being. Just as he, that is Sri Krishna, that is, since it is explained by Narada in 7.15.27 that Sri Krishna himself, whom worldly persons considered to be merely an ordinary human being during his avatar, is actually Bhagavan himself. So he takes it like this, that the second reading, that if, Krishna during his avatar, some people thought, oh, Krishna is just a human being. So if even people around Krishna thought that way, then what's the big deal if people around the Guru think that way? So let's see, I'll just read this one more comment which ties up the discussion of this verse, and then we're out of time for today. So both Sri Jivapad and Sri Chakravartipad reiterate the second of these interpretations in their commentaries on this verse. Sri Chakravartipad in particular adds the following elucidation. Quote, a question is raised. Well, the father, son, and so on, that is, and the other relatives and the neighbors of the Guru consider him only an ordinary human being. How shall this one disciple alone consider him to be the supreme Ishvara? So as you can see, he's sort of elaborating the Purva Paksha that Samipad raised. So thus he says, Esha, so this verse addresses that difficulty. Bhagavan, that is the son of the Yadus, Krishna, or the son of the Raghus, Rama, indeed is the Ishvara of Pradhan and the Purush, that is of Maya and the Jivas. Does he, whom a person, that is a person born at the time of his avatar, considers an ordinary human being, become an ordinary human being thereby? So, Rama or Krishna or Bhagavan himself. But when they're manifest in the world and an ordinary person sees them to be nothing more than another ordinary person, does that change who they are? Does that make them not who they are just because some people don't recognize it? If a piece of gold is laying in the mud, does that make it a piece of junk? Is it not gold? It's still gold, even if other people say, that's just some junk in the mud. How could it be valuable? But if one can actually see that it's gold, then even if other people don't see that or recognize that, it doesn't change the constitution of the object. So indeed, rather, he certainly remains the supreme Ishvara, even if people don't recognize him. The Guru too is such. That is, the Guru is a form of the supreme Ishvara for a disciple, and he remains such even though the Guru's relatives and other persons in the world do not see him in that way. This is the purport. So, if others around him don't see that way, that's fine. They don't have to. They don't need to. It's the perception unique to the disciple. So, as we'll get into as this discussion goes on, I'll just convey some of the main points or gist right now. What we get through all of these citations is this idea that the Guru is perceived as divine or perceived as a role of Bhagavan by virtue of Bhagavan's nature, by virtue of it being a function that Bhagavan is expressing, and by virtue of a disciple or a student recognizing that agency of the divine in that relationship. So what's to be noted here, especially, at least I'll say, perhaps relevant in the modern context, is there's no reference here to the personality of the Guru or how many qualities are exhibited by the Guru. So, in other words, if we, see some charismatic figure who seems to have lots of knowledge or lots of love or lots of charisma, and then we say, because of these qualities, he's divine. That's a very different perspective than what's being said here. Here, it's a recognition of the function of how Bhagavan himself is bringing about the dispensation of knowledge about himself or of knowledge about the well-being of people. It's a profound degree of gratitude for a source of wisdom and a source of guidance and a source of benefit in one's life, and seeing that to be of divine origin. So to revere the Guru as a form of Bhagavan for that purpose doesn't have anything to do with the specific character, personality, or behavior of that person. And therefore, if the person also is charming or loving or charismatic or, all these things, then of course, all the merrier, and that's certainly desirable and wonderful. But even if the person is not, maybe showing 10 out of 10 on every rubric of considerations, that doesn't make that person any less divine, or that doesn't make it valuable or diminish the value of the disciple seeing, nevertheless, the role or the agency of Bhagavan manifest in the form of that teacher or in the form of that guru. So this type of understanding can diminish the tendency or the susceptibility towards personality cults, towards excessive consideration with social achievements or societal recognition or other aspects of spiritual culture that have some social or worldly side to them. And this is important because sometimes when there's a lot of emphasis on how much knowledge the guru has, or how socially influential the guru is, or how many followers they have, how much wealth they have, how much property they have, how many achievements they have, all of this, then there can create a whole tendency towards becoming preoccupied with these externalities away from the actual spirit of the teachings or of any experience of the divine reality or the bhakti and the lila that all of these things are meant to be about in the case of the path of bhakti. So this is a very broad, ontological, grounded perspective, if you will, which isn't relevant or which isn't spoken with respect to any particular teacher. This is a principle that pervades times and cultures and circumstances. These are teachings made in a text, in a shastra, which are guiding guru-disciple relationships across centuries and centuries, and are establishing a norm and an attitude that is going to lead to an attitude that will benefit the disciple to make the most of that relationship and be best benefited by inviting that relationship into their life and sincerely engaging in it. So we'll look at further implications of these points as the discussion further unfolds. We'll look at further points made by the acharyas related to other relevant statements in the Bhagavatam. So in summary, the guru is not to be seen as merely a human being. The guru is to be seen as a manifestation of Bhagavan, or as we'll, more broadly, everything is to be seen as, grace of Bhagavan coming upon oneself. The deity is a manifest form of Bhagavan's grace. The name of Bhagavan is a manifest form of Bhagavan's grace. The Guru is a manifest form of Bhagavan's grace. The text the Guru teaches, the Shastra, is a manifest form of Bhagavan's grace. The path of Bhakti is a manifest form of Bhagavan's grace. This is ultimately all different ways of cultivating the universal abhideya in Jiva Goswami's analysis of unmukata or sammukhya, that to be facing towards or to be intent upon Bhagavan and perceiving and recognizing the role, the grace, the expression of Bhagavan, of the Ishtadevata, everywhere and always in all circumstances, so as to maximize absorption in him. All of these principles are here to fortify that, or to be means by which that state of awareness and ultimately that state of absorption and devotion come about. So I'll conclude here for today. If there are any comments, questions, corrections, or otherwise, please feel free. All right, well, we can conclude here for today, and this discussion will go on for some additional sessions. We'll look at a number of other very important comments that we get in the works of Jiva Gosvami, Sanatana Gosvami, and others regarding this very important topic for every individual sadhaka on the path. The relationship that they have with the Guru is a very big part of their life and can be extremely influential, ideally for the best, and sadly, in the reality of the world, sometimes it also can lead to, or there are cases of abuses and ways that the thing can become out of tune and detrimental. So to have a very grounded, clear understanding of what are the parameters for how attitudes are to be fostered in the context of this relationship is a very, very important thing. So we hope from this discussion people can glean a great degree of reverence as well as a careful, grounded understanding of how that reverence is to be fostered, and thus ultimately how it can be best carried through in one's practical devotional life. Vaiṣṇavebhyo namo namah. Jai Shri Guru, Jai Shri Gaur, Jai Jai Radhe Shyam.
Jai Radhe. Thank you.